Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Harlow, and I work in VSAC's Resource Center.
Good morning. I'm Stacey King. I am an education counselor for the Adult Education Opportunity Center program at VSAC, and I'm joining Carrie today for this presentation.
We're going to start off today with the federal updates, and depending on timing, we're hoping to give you a little break in between that and our updates for state programs as well as VSAC. Let's get started. So, of course, everything seems to begin with the FAFSA, right? The free application for federal student aid. And we talk about why do you complete this form, right? You complete this form in order to qualify for, federal student aid as well as student loans. A lot of time, our state grant program requires the FAFSA, as well as colleges for some of their need-based aid. Um, and so there's a number of reasons why people will file the FAFSA. But we also hear from families, especially when we're doing presentations, and you may hear this too, we're not going to qualify for aid, so why should I bother to fill out the FAFSA? Well, if a family would like a student to borrow student loans, they have to file the FAFSA. There are some colleges that require the FAFSA before they will award scholarships because they want to make certain that students have exhausted all of their options for aid before reaching into their funds. Additionally, students could be eligible for work study, as well as any other institutional aid. But also, without the FAFSA, there's no way to communicate special circumstances to the college. So if there were changes in family income or a change in someone's marital status or additional expenses that aren't reflected on the FAFSA, for instance, we have communities represented here today where we've had some catastrophic flooding. And so some of those families may be talking about what they had to endure and what expenses they had that maybe weren't covered by FEMA. So those would all be things that could be communicated, but you have to start with the FAFSA. So last year was the launch of the Better FAFSA. I'm sure we all, or many of us here, remember that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about two ways that students can file the FAFSA. Obviously, the preferred way is using your computer or mobile device. That's FAFSA.gov. And more than 99% of FAFSA filers will file electronically. There's a paper application. And what I will say is that the paper application is not necessarily better. The new paper application from last year was 22 pages long with instructions. It needs additional postage to send in, and it takes more time to process. Some of you here with colleges and universities might remember that those paper FAFSAs did not get processed last year until this summer. So we do talk to families about it takes more time to process. So if you can, we would really stress that families should try to do this electronically. But we'd also like to give you some updates. And there are a lot of them. We're just going to do a high-level overview, but in addition to what we're covering today, there are also some federal updates around things like negotiated rulemaking, and you probably would love to see those. That's available on the Federal Student Aid website, but what we're really going to focus on today is highlighting a few of the areas that you might be more concerned about with the students and clients that you work with. So there are a couple of things that we know about the cycle, right? Nationally, high school senior FAFSA filings were down in the 24-25 cycle, which, by the way, is not over, by about 8.9%. We were at the last report, we were ranked about 43rd nationally. We were down, my understanding is about 6% with high school seniors. So we wanted to just make sure that you had some of those numbers. We have the numbers for the FAFSA submissions that actually happened. We did find that things caught up a little bit later in the cycle. I attended a conference yesterday an online training where people were talking about that the freshman class this year was down by about 4% nationally. And there's some wonder, there's some curiosity around whether or not the rollout of that better FAFSA may have had something to do with it. Students may have known what kind of financial aid they had, but they may not have had enough time to make decisions. The better FAFSA, by the way, meant that an additional 560,000 more students were eligible for Pell than the previous cycle. So we talked about the FAFSA submissions and processing the paper FAFSAs. There were issues with some students with mixed status families, which we will talk a little bit more about that. What they found when they were processing the paper FAFSAs was that as time went on and improvements were made, some of the people who filed paper FAFSAs had actually gone in and done an electronic one. They did not update those electronic FAFSAs. They felt like the electronic FAFSAs had probably come in later. FAFSA corrections, there were some issues with that with institutions. And so we certainly understand that that was something that was happening. And there was also some FAFSA college support strategy, which involved helping institutions of higher education with personnel, helping community-based organizations with funding and resources. There's some more information on the federal student aid website about that. So just to talk for a minute about mixed status families, there were some real issues with getting the FSA ID and being able to get people verified. They had a process which was using a credit agency to verify identity, and for some reason that did not work very well. So they allowed bypassing the manual identity validation for the 24-25 school year. And they have also said that for this coming school year, this coming cycle, 25-26, they are going to extend that. And what they're going to do is they'll extend that until they have, one, a manual validation process that avoids delay and confusion, and also the ability for non-social security number holders to utilize the direct data exchange with the IRS. So those are not small feats, but that is something that's being worked on. And in the meantime, people without a social security number can go through that process. They do say that they would prefer that families do the verification, even though they may not be required to do it for a while, to still get that done. And again, those people need to have created that FSA ID in order to access and add information for a student's FAFSA. They also had a couple of websites that were really helpful for updates and alerts, as far as giving updates as far as how many people had filed. They were kept up to date with workarounds, as well as notifications about solutions when things were fixed. Okay, so there were some additional award year flexibilities, right? One of them was they really significantly reduced verification process. And so what that meant was really they were focused on verifying to prevent identity fraud, but you did not see a lot of verification as far as family size and things like that. They reduced the percentage of students who were chosen in order to be a little bit more flexible and allow institutions to be able to work through this. The other thing that they did is there's a program called Gainful Employment that a lot of colleges and universities, institutions of higher education, so trade schools that were eligible for federal student aid fall under this as well. That due date was extended to January 15th of 2025 because it was supposed to be due this fall. And that includes the qualifying graduate as well as undergraduate programs. Let's talk a little bit more about what's going to be different. So December 1st will be the first date that the form will be available. They said initially that would be on or before December 1st. I think we are hearing that it's probably going to be December 1st. And just a reminder that December 1st is the first date the form will be available, not the deadline. Federal student aid delayed the FAFSA to have a better working application. They heard a chorus of requests from institutions of higher education, national associations, national professional associations, and community-based organizations just expressing a preference for a later open date with the FAFSA that works versus an earlier open date using October 1st as an example, with the possibility of continuing those issues that they had last year. And so what's going to be different, right? Right now, there is a beta test going on. And so there are people and certain organizations that are allowing early access to the 25-26 FAFSA. So there's a limited number of users first, along with additional support from federal student aid. It's really hoping to like resolve FAFSA completion errors and to ensure the instructions are clear and easy to use. We know last year that some of the instructions were not clear, and that caused a lot of errors for families filling out this form. To talk a little bit about the beta timeline, right? Beta 1 was about 680 users. Out of those 680, 60 were rejected, 48 were missing student or parent signatures and had an immediate correction available. There were minor bugs that were identified and successful data transmission to more than 5,500 institutions, which meant those institutions could take that information and see if it was working on their end too. Beta 2 began October 15th. A little more than 3,000 students were invited as of 10/28. There had been 2,365 FAFSA submitted, and they were doing some follow-up, and what they found was 93% of those users had satisfaction, were showing satisfaction, 87% indicating it was a reasonable time for them to complete it. Beta 3 is scheduled for early November with tens of thousands of users, so that we're really ramping this up so that by the time the full launch happens, a lot of the bugs hopefully will have been addressed, and either there will be workarounds or more hopefully there will be solutions that are already in place.
All right. So we are hoping with all of this amazing beta testing that all of this will be worked out. So far, they've only identified some very minor bugs at this point, and there are immediate corrections available, which was a challenge last year where people could not go in and fix any of their mistakes that they knew they had made. And they are aware of the parent and student signature missing challenge, and they are continuing to try to find ways to word that and put things in place that will prompt to be sure that signatures are completed before they try to submit. All right, and we can continue on. So one of the other challenges last year was getting assistance with these FAFSA challenges. A call center last year had unprecedented numbers of calls, and keep in mind they are fielding things including, loan issues, loan-related calls, general info on like how financial aid works. But the majority of the calls were 24-25 FAFSA related. There were very long wait times or inabilities to get through. And so the vendors have been really ramping up and getting ready to be able to field calls this year, and they have added more than 700 new agents. And the beta testing, while that's obviously a very small number of people currently doing it, the average wait time right now is 17 seconds to get a call answered. So we are hopeful, and they will continue. Not all 700 of the new agents are currently already working, so they will continue ramping up as more and more people begin submitting that FAFSA, and we are hopeful that this year the call center response will be much quicker. All right. And while the FAFSA itself is delayed, there are things that students and families and contributors can be doing. So the timeline this year is going to look like currently in October, any early decision or early action, some early action students are encouraged to really check with their colleges that they are applying to see if the CSS profile is required. This is a different financial aid form that are some schools, institutions required to determine institutional aid. So they should be checking. One of those schools that some are not familiar with, UVM has added the CSS profile to their request for financial aid forms. And then the anytime a person has not yet done an account with federal student aid, they need to create an FSA ID, which is their username and password or federal student aid account. That process takes a few days for it to be verified by the Social Security Administration that that name goes with that birth date and that Social Security number, and that they are eligible to file. So creating the FSA ID should not be something people wait to do. They should do it now. And then they can also create their My VSAC account, which is for state-based aid and scholarships. And they can file their 25-26 Vermont grant application, which opened on October 1st. The Unified Scholarship application is also open. So we're encouraging students to really use the month of November to research scholarships and consider applying for those VSAC assisted scholarships. There's a process of completing the form, but then also some additional documentation may be needed, like letters of recommendation or essays. So encouraged to do that. And then next slide. December 1st. This is what we're hoping for. That is a Sunday. It's gonna be hopefully a quiet day. It will open on or before December 1st. We'll be able to do the 25-26 FAFSA. We do let people know that, as Carrie said, that's not the deadline. That's just the first day it will be open to all. And we do encourage sometimes waiting a few days to see if there are any other major bugs that will be identified and cleaned up. So it's okay to wait just a few days after December 1st. During December and January, you should be checking for financial aid forms nights at area high schools and agencies, and VSAC will continue to offer virtual and in-person FAFSA help through the Resource Center. And you may get Carrie herself, which would be amazing. And in February, we want to note that that is the deadline, February 12th, 2025, for the VSAC assisted scholarships. So FAFSAs do need to be filed by midnight that day to be considered for any scholarships that indicate financial need as a component. That's also when the supporting materials need to be uploaded or postmarked. Okay. So this is the current federal student aid landing page. This is not different from 24-25, but we just wanted to highlight up in the top right where the login and create account options are. That is where you would go to start the creation of your FSA ID or federal student aid account username and password. Oh, and I should say, sorry, if you can go back, Chris. On this page also, there's more information and topics below that you can find out more details about things that are occurring. Sorry. Thanks, Chris. All right, so here at FAFSA.gov, which is still a working address, perfectly fine to just type that in. You can go to studentaid.gov and then go to complete the FAFSA. It will bring you here. And this is what the screen, we believe, will look like. And you are going to do, if you are a new user, start a new form, 25-26. Or if you've started one, or you need to accept an invitation to complete one, that is where you would do the edit existing forms. And then if you're looking for 24-25, that is going to be just slightly below to the left, and you will either start a new form or access one you've begun. So this page does not look different really from 24-25, but we just wanted to make sure you were aware where to click and start your process. And I'm going to hand it back to Carrie to talk about who's completing the form.
Sure. So the FAFSA, the Better FAFSA last year changed their process a little bit. In the past, students and families could file the FAFSA with one form, and the parent and student could log into that one form individually, but now it's really a roles-based process. So when a person logs in with their FSA ID, they're given a welcome page, and then they're asking how they're starting this form, if they're starting as the student or the parent. And the student has their set of questions, and if the parent's invited, they go in and they will answer their questions. If it were a spouse, that would also come up and say if a spouse was needed, they would say spouse. So contributor was a term that came up last year, and the contributor is really the person who's required to contribute information to the form. It is not something that means that person who put their information down has to pay any amount. Certainly, that's something that families should be working out amongst themselves. But for dependent students, it's the student and the parent, and sometimes it can be very confusing for dependent students as to which parent they should be using. And so new for this year, this parent contributor wizard tool that was in the FAFSA originally is now available on the FSA website. You don't have to get into the FAFSA to get to it. And so people can use that and kind of answer a series of questions, and then it would come up and say which parent's information needs to be on the FAFSA. So that's a very helpful tool that's now available before people even can begin their FAFSA. And so traditionally, let me say this, dependent students invite parents as contributors, and independent students may invite a spouse as a contributor if that's appropriate and they need to do that. What I will tell you is that at VSAC, when we have been working with students, dependent students and their FAFSAs, what we have found is that there were a large number of errors that happened when students invited their parents without their parents with them. And the errors were sometimes a misspelling of name. It would, and not that they didn't know how to spell their parents' name, it's just like data entry, or misentering a social security number, or misentering a date of birth. The minute that happens, inviting the contributor fails. And so we saw a lot of issues with that last year. That was a pretty common error. It was not necessarily an issue with the better FAFSA. It was hard to tease that out initially. But what we sometimes are encouraging, and the National College Attainment Network actually did a training for community-based organizations. They actually also recommended that if you can have the parent invite the student, what we find is that the parents tend to know the student's information a lot better than the students know their parents' information. So just a little life hack for you when it comes to the FAFSA. And we have a pop quiz. And Chris, I cannot
Popping
see
that here. No, I'm launching that right
okay.
now.
All right. And so what will be different for the 2025, 2026 FAFSA? See people like putting in their answers. Perfect. I think we're probably at the end of, oh, no, people still responding. Yay.
Carrie, while we wait for folks to respond, one question just came in. Maybe you can give some insight to it. How
Sure.
does the FAFSA work for parents that have an account for a different child already?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. For parents, if they created an FSA ID to fill out a FAFSA for another child, the parents can reuse their FSA ID. The other child will need their own FSA ID. So in that case, the parent would not need to create a new one, but the younger child will probably need one. And there was a change last year, which we're not covering in this, But what I will tell you is that who is a parent contributor on the FAFSA changed last year. And so if a parent filled out a FAFSA and they're, separated or divorced from the student's other biological or adoptive parent, they might want to go back through that wizard to just make sure that they've got the right parent, because they may or may not, because of that change, which is, instead of who did the student live with more, it is actually now who provided more financial support for the student. And so I see, let's go ahead and give our answer, Chris. It looks like most of the people answered all of the above. And that is correct, all of the above. So the first date will be on or before December 1st. There'll be more call center agents, and beta testing has been happening. So that's great. Thank you. And there's our results.
Okay.
All right. Good.
Carrie, sorry, I apologize
Sure.
for coughing. But I just want to jump in. There was another question. If a student lives with two parents in a home, do both have to provide information? If they are married and married filing jointly, only one needs to complete the form. But if they are unmarried living together, each would need an FSA ID. Or if they are married but filed separately in the prior year, both would need an FSA ID and to contribute. Throw that
Great.
in.
Thank you, Stacey.
Sure.
Great. And so, of course, we're going to now move to, parental information on the FAFSA. And so there's a question that showed up last year on the FAFSA that will continue this year. And it said if the student had unusual circumstances which prevented contact with the parents. So a parent's incarcerated, or the parent is unavailable because the student is a refugee and the parent's out of the country. They can actually choose to say yes to this question. They'll receive a provisional SAI, which is the student aid index that colleges and the federal government will use to determine aid. And that will require follow-up with the institution of higher education, as well as most likely some documentation. There was confusion on last year's form because there was another question that a dependent student with a parent who's just refusing to contribute their information. It's not that there was no contact or no way to be in touch with that parent. It was just the parent was not going to contribute their information. And in that case, the student could say, my parents are refusing to complete the FAFSA. I would like to be considered for unsubsidized loans only. The wording on this question was very confusing. A lot of students filling out the FAFSA said, no, my parents will not contribute information, and all I want is unsubsidized loans, when the reality was, no, their parents were willing. They wanted more financial aid, but the reality was they didn't understand the question. What happened with federal student aid was that wording was changed a number of times during the 24-25 cycle to see if that worked. What they did now, they have changed it to the form will autofill to no, meaning that the student can get parental information. They do not only want unsubsidized loans. And if the student changes the answer to yes, they'll get a screen that says, if you continue, you will not be eligible for most federal financial aid. So you can either continue or return to the form and fix it. We may find that that changes again because there was some information taken as far as feedback for wording from people to federal student aid, but we're hoping that there will be a workaround and less confusion around this question in this cycle. Another thing that we just wanted to mention is that after taxes have been transferred, right? This is the direct data transfer is a much easier process. And some of you who may have worked with students realize that instead of going to a separate page, trying to say yes to federal tax information, now there's just an accept button, and that information will be directly downloaded. But if parents or independent students have an IRA or pension rollover on their tax return from 2023, federal student aid can't tell the difference between a rollover and a non-taxable distribution. in the tax information that comes from the IRS. There will be a question to clarify on the 2026 FAFSA that asks about the rollover. You can't say all of it. You have to probably have, the parent would probably have to have a copy of their taxes and be able to put down the dollar amount. Let's talk a little bit about FSA ID updates. We have talked about this before, but the FSA has to be created, and not only created, but confirmed before beginning that person's part of the FAFSA. The invites on the FAFSA have to match up with the invitee's name, and it has to be an exact match to the Social Security card. So if the person's name is Patricia and the student invites the parents and puts down the parent's name as Trish, it's not going to work. The information also has to match up with invitation on the FSA ID. The email address is the only exception. You can use a different email address, but the date of birth and social security number has to match up, or the parent will not even get that invitation. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the SAI. That was new last year, so I feel like we don't have to talk too much about that, but there was clarification that came since our last training, and I just want to add that. And that clarification came in, and it said there's a means tested series of questions on the FAFSA. And one of the questions they asked was about free or reduced lunch. It has to be answered yes, only if the family was found eligible for free or reduced lunch, and not when all students receive free lunch. So that is clarification that we got from last year. And so we would appreciate, having you all know that. Wanted to just talk for a minute about fall financial aid support. We referred to this earlier. We'll have one-to-one FAFSA completion and Vermont grant support. We have in-person and virtual opportunities available. The dates and times will be at vsac.org events on our events page, and signups are going to open the week. We'll open those signups the week of November 18th. They're not going to start probably until the week of December 9th. So just so you know, we also have a FAFSA hotline. There is financial aid information available as well as FAFSA information available. So if someone has not met and they are looking for this information, they can find it there. I just wanted to add, we know that there are additional forms to fill out. This is not part of the federal updates, but we just wanted to mention that school counselors and people working with students or clients with financial aid forms want to really stress checking college websites for forms required, deadlines, and resources for help. The CSS profile is required for need-based financial aid at some colleges, not necessarily for merit. This is really need-based. There's much more in-depth questions than you will find on the FAFSA. For instance, if a student's parents are separated or divorced, it will ask for some schools for more information from the other set of parents. There's a fee for filing, but there is an automatic fee waiver for families who make less than $100,000 a year. Of course, you want to check early action and early decision. They have earlier deadlines, and so we are probably right on top of those. Questions about completing the forms can be found on college or university websites by contacting the financial aid office at those schools, as well as on the College Board CSS profile webpage. And what I can tell you is the CSS profile has a really robust FAQ page, as well as information to contact them. I think we're ready for another pop quiz.
I'll launch that right now.
Oh, you know what, Chris? This is the wrong question. So we're going to skip the pop quiz for this one.
I'm so sorry about that.
No, that is my bad. Definitely my bad. But we do want to open this up for questions.
There's a question in the chat, Carrie, from Allison Witherspoon. She's been advised to have students and families hold off on completing the Vermont grant until the FAFSA is available, as the Vermont grant cannot be processed without FAFSA. Is this still accurate?
What I can tell you is that the Vermont grant will not be determined without FAFSA information. But you can apply for Vermont grant without the FAFSA. In the past, people could go from the FAFSA into the Vermont grant application and information would carry over. That is no longer the case. So you can link right from the FAFSA to the Vermont grant application, but nothing's coming over. So if you wanted to file the Vermont grant application right now, that's totally fine. It's just nothing will happen. We won't ask for additional information or move the process along until the FAFSA comes through, but they could certainly file it and have it waiting.
Check it off the list.
Yes, another thing to check off the list. All right. So we're going to move on to education loans, and this
one
will
other
be-
question, Carrie.
Oh, sure.
About who would bypass the identity verification. So for the FSA ID, if a contributor does not have a social security number, they will be prompted to do the identity verification, but they can complete the FAFSA without having successfully done that. But then they will still be prompted to do it. That is a waiver for the 24-25 year and for 25-26. And so just to clarify, the student has to have a social security number or be an eligible non-citizen from a freely associated state in order to be eligible for federal aid, but their contributors, like a parent or spouse, do not have to have a social security number.
Great. Thank you, Stacey.
Yeah. All right. I'll give Carrie a rest for a moment. I'll take over on educational loans. There are not a ton of updates in this section. So let's go ahead to the next slide. The big excitement, which is not exciting but frustrating, is that the SAVE repayment plan is currently on hold. So SAVE stands for Saving on a Valuable Education. It replaced a different income-based repayment plan. And it reduced monthly payments for many students who enrolled in this, and various loans were eligible. It is currently on hold as litigation moves through the courts, but those that had enrolled in the SAVE repayment plan are automatically in a no interest forbearance. Those months of forbearance where they do not have to make a payment will not count towards public service loan forgiveness. So that is something to consider if a student is working towards that. But the forbearance is currently extended to April 2025, and that date may change as litigation continues. The other exciting update for loans in general in repayment is that income verification for income-based repayment programs can be done directly through that IRS direct data exchange now. So a borrower can approve the transfer of the information from the IRS, and that will pull it over automatically. They don't need to provide a copy of taxes. They don't have to know what their address was 2 years ago, which is great. And that process will automatically continue every year from that point, unless a borrower revokes their consent. So it's great for those students who we found that previous years, those that were doing income verification may forget, and then they would not be eligible for that income-based repayment anymore. And that can now be put basically on auto and take care of itself. That's the major update for loans. So a reminder that loan interest rates are set each year. So this is the current 24-25 slide of interest rates for students and origination fees. And so we wanted to make sure that was clear for the current year, but also to remind everybody that the origination fee is taken out of the amount that is borrowed before it is applied to the student's account. So that is a fee that is given to the loan processor for doing the paperwork of getting this in place. So the student loan, if a student were to borrow $5,500, for example, as a freshman, only 5,442 would actually go against their bill. And then for the plus loan, note that the origination fee is significantly higher. So if a parent were to borrow $5,000, 4789 would be applied to the bill. And for the families that are trying to really budget this to the dollar, that's really important to take into account. And so these are the current interest rates, and those will be determined for 25-26, typically in June of each year. Student loans, these are when the student is the borrower, and we always encourage students to accept their federal student loans first. These are called direct student loans. The current interest rate, 6.53%. And students will be eligible to borrow these loans automatically when they complete the FAFSA. And then if they want the loans, there will be additional paperwork to fill out a promissory note and entrance counseling so they understand what it is to borrow and pay back interest. Most colleges are going to package student loans for their students in their financial aid awards, and likely the full amount. So that's likely part of the package as you're reviewing it. There are also non-federal student loans. So there are various lenders, including nonprofits like VSAC or for-profit organizations or banks or credit unions. So these can be called alternative loans or private loans, and they are an option that students may want to compare to determine what's the best selection for them. There are varying interest rates, there are fixed interest rates, there are different lengths of repayment, and there are different borrower benefits like reduction in interest rate for auto pay. These are all things you can review and compare, and we actually do a publication, which we'll talk about a little bit later, about comparing loans, which can be very helpful. So the current VSAC private loan is the Vermont Advantage student loan. It's a fixed rate, depending upon the repayment terms of like length and what you want to pay. And we recommend you compare those to other options. Most non-federal student loans will require a co-signer, or as Carrie likes to say, a co-borrower, because they are equally responsible for paying it back if the student does not. Yeah. All right, parents also have multiple options for loans. The federal loan is called the PLUS, or parent loan for undergraduate students. Current interest rate is just above 9%. There are other parent borrowing options, including VSAC, who has a parent advantage loan, also at a fixed rate, and other non-federal lenders, including nonprofits, for-profits, and banks and credit unions. These, including the PLUS loan, we really recommend that families review these and compare them to see what is the best option. Many schools will package a Parent Plus loan as an option, and I try to remind students that this is the school saying, this is the unmet need, here is one way to cover it. But families should review their other options for covering it to make sure they're getting the best option for themselves. And again, that's going to be in our publication, which I think might be right here. So we strongly recommend checking this out. This is not an advertisement for VSAC student loans. It is information about what it means to borrow, interest, options for repayment, options for forgiveness, and the way that education loans work. So we encourage you to visit our website. You can order an education loan guide and you can read it online. And there are options through VSAC, as I said, that may be good options for the students.
Stacey, we had a quick question come in, if I may.
Sure.
Are the VSAC loan amounts capped like the federal student loans are?
I was supposed to talk about that. That's a great question. Thank you. The parent loans, the PLUS loan and private federal loans are the cost of attendance, which includes tuition, fees, room and board or living expenses, books, transportation. The college builds a budget. That's called the cost of attendance, minus whatever aid was offered to the student What is left over is the eligibility for a parent loan. So school costs 50,000, they were offered 30,000 of aid, the parent, or the student with a cosigner can borrow the additional 20,000 difference. That's a great question. So this limited by the cost of attendance minus aid. These are some other loan resources that can be used to compare. I like the first one, the Debt Wizard. This is a great one for students to use to look at what they're borrowing compared to what they might make in their field when they're coming out to see if it's a reasonable amount to pay. There is a loan simulator on studentaid.gov where you can look at the different repayment options, what will happen if you do graduated repayment or extended repayment, and how that changes the payments themselves, but also the interest over time. And then Carrie did a great VSAC shows you how about choosing education loans. I just saw the chat pop up that they were asking about the cap on student loans. And yes, federal student loans are capped at $5,500 for first year, $6,500 second year, $7,500 third and fourth year, and then there was a lifetime limit. And that one's escaping me, Carrie. Do you remember the?
You're testing me, but I think it's 31,000.
Yeah, somewhere around that. So
Yeah.
it's not like a full amount for a fifth year. So keep that in mind, as many students do not finish a 4-year degree in 4 years. And then independent students, it's very similar, but with an additional $4,000 of unsubsidized loan borrowing. So 9,500, 10,500, and then 11,500 third, fourth year, and also a limit, which is somewhere around 50,000, but I don't remember. We can check that. There are federal limits. So that is definitely a really important question, because many students think that they can borrow whatever is missing from their unmet need, and that is not the case. They are capped in the federal loans, and borrowing after that is likely going to require a cosigner. Other questions for loans?
Can I just jump on to your answer, Stacey? Would that be okay?
Sure. Please.
I think when students are borrowing with another lender and they're borrowing the non-federal loans, this is really where conversations with families are going to be important, because I don't believe we have a limit as far as how much students can borrow. We are looking at the ability to pay back, and we're looking at that with the co-borrower. So again, this is really one of those things where students and families are making financial decisions about this.
Great.
Okay. Let's just talk for a minute about information resources. We have resources on our website. We have a news and updates page for education professionals. On the VSAC.org landing page, you can find a link saying, I am an education professional. It will take you to some of these resources. Additionally, there's a financial aid resources page for education professionals and other professionals who are working with students thinking about college. The financial aid resources page has a lot of links to things from federal student aid, from our state programs, as well as programs for homeless or foster youth. There's a lot of information that you can find there. It's kind of one-stop shopping. And when I am working with new talent search or gear up counselors at VSAC and we're training, this is one of the pages that I say, boy, you should just bookmark this and use it as a place where you can find a lot of those resources. Finally, I wanted to mention the Federal Student Aid Estimator. They have updated that for 25-26, as well as, it's not the FAFSA, but it will give you an estimate of federal student aid as well as an SAI. The FAFSA prototype is available for education professionals. I don't think it's really meant to be released to families. It's a tool to better understand the FAFSA experience, and I think we have a link as well on our education professionals page. It's not a demonstration site, and it varies slightly from the actual FAFSA. So for instance, one of the things is you can't like find Burlington High School, you can't find University of Vermont. You're just going to put in a random school when you're going through it. and it needs an access code, which is prototype 2526. But I also highly recommend it because you get a feel for moving through the application and what it might look like. As the form is still being developed and they're still working on it, that prototype may or may not look a lot like the form that we're going to have December 1st. We know that most of the data elements on 2526 FAFSA will be similar to 2425, but the words could be different or it might look a little different. And finally, I'm sure you may have additional questions and we are happy to answer those. My contact information is on here and Stacey's contact information is on here as well. Chris, we have one last pop quiz that you had brought up earlier. Do you want to, we had our pop quiz slide in the wrong place. Do you want to pull that up?
Yeah, I can do that.
And so this is specifically about loans.
Is it this the one
Oh.
you were thinking?
That's the answer. Oh, no, that's the question. Good. Yes, that is the one. True or false, borrowers in the SAVE program can have their time in forbearance count toward the months that they need documented for public service loan forgiveness. And it's a single choice answer, so you can't choose multiples. You can't say both true and false.
While we give folks a chance to respond to this, I just want to give voice to a question that came in earlier. They didn't quite catch what you were saying, something related to gainful employment extending to January 25. Would you just mind repeating that note?
Sure. That was some guidance issued by federal student aid to institutions of higher education. Institutions of higher education had to report gainful employment numbers, and my understanding was that that deadline was originally this fall, and they did extend that as some of their flexibilities because of things going on with the FAFSA. They extended that to January.
Thank you. Looks like we've got about 61 people answered the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results now.
Great. And so the correct answer is false. Their time in forbearance does not count toward the months that will be documented for public service loan forgiveness. So even if somebody makes payments during this interest-free forbearance that students will have with the SAVE program, unfortunately, those payments will not count until the forbearance is ended.
I'm not sure that I think I want to check that, Carrie. I think payments can count, but the forbearance months, if you do not make a payment, are not going to count. But we'll check that.
I
and
heard
get
that
more
as
detail.
well.
Yes.
I thought
But
there was a workaround where they had to go into another income-driven repayment plan. So here we are having a discussion on the training. But we will make certain when we put up this slide deck on that education professionals resources page, we're going to make certain to add a slide that answers that question.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, we have one more question, which I'd be glad to have failed. We have found the VSAC shows you how for completing the FAFSA and the Vermont grant scholarship applications to be extremely helpful for families. Will those be updated this year? And the answer is to do the how to complete the FAFSA, we had access to a demo site. That demo site no longer exists. And so doing a VSAC shows you how for the FAFSA may not be possible. However, we'll take that feedback about the grants and scholarships back to the folks here to let them know that that was something, Corey, that you found helpful.